right, so we are now on our first speaker. Okay, so let me emphasize this very important matter to all of you. For everyone's information, our esteemed speakers will focus on their expertise, sharing insights relevant to the phases outlined in our curriculum. Each speaker will cover two pertinent areas of focus. So please do not be confused if one speaker discusses phases 7 and 9, while another covers phases 2 and 4, and so on. This approach allows our speaker to provide breakthrough knowledge within their respective fields of proficiency. Additionally, it's essential to synchronize the availability of our international speakers with our webinar schedule. As a result, the sequence of our curriculum from phase 1 to 10 will be reorganized accordingly. For further information and inquiries, please feel free to contact our administrative team and we will ensure your concerns are addressed promptly. Okay, now to introduce our first speaker, may I call on Pastor Rudy Lumad, STRAP's PRISM Vice President.
All right, for our esteemed speaker, Chuck Robinson, PhD, an adjunct professor of literature in Southern New Hampshire University. Dr. Chuck Robinson earned his PhD in education with a major in English language and literature from the University of Memphis in May 2017. He holds a Master of Arts in English language and literature from Syracuse University uh, in May on May in May 2009, and a Master of Arts in Humanities from the University of Chicago, June 2005. He completed his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy at Benedictine University, Leslie, Illinois, in May 2004. He has obtained certifications including Teaching with Technology Certificate for Faculty, University of Nevada, Reno, December 2019, and a master certificate, 220 hours in TEFL from International TEFL and TESOL Training, June 2019. Graduate certificate in African American Literature from the University of Memphis, May 2017. Currently, he holds a position at Southern New Hampshire University College of Online and Continuing Education, where he serves as a subject matter expert for the course Improvement Project since June of 2019. Additionally, he is an adjunct instructor since September 2017. In terms of recent publications and presentations, Dr. Robinson has authored Scale Shifts from Polk Street to a Broken Earth, or Literary Naturalism's Geontological Affordances in CR, the New Centennial Review in Volume 20, Number 3 of 2021. Number 2 is Parable of the Talents as Genre, Criticism and the Holy Spirit of Speculative Fiction. In God is Change, Religious Practices and Ideologies in the Works of Octavia Butler, edited by Aparahita Nanda and Shelby Crosby, Temple University Press, 2021. Dr. Robinson is a proficient in 5 languages: English, French, German, Italian, and Korean. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chuck Robinson.
Good morning, Doc.
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes,
clear,
very
sir.
clear.
All right. Let me just tweak my volume knobs a little bit here. Wow. It sounds really impressive to hear someone else read my resume. I should have someone do that when I need a lift all the time. Maybe I could have my wife do it. I want to emphasize, actually, my main teaching gig these days is as a TESOL teacher in South Korea. I'm sort of wrapping up things at SNHU, and I'm a full-time teacher in March. The Korean school year starts at the beginning of March. I will be starting at Korean Aerospace University on their faculty of liberal arts. And let me see here. It's been a while since I've been on Zoom, so I have to remember how to share my screen. There we go. All right, that's what I want. And there we go. So the title appeared a little bit differently on the program, and that's my fault. I got started late on composing this presentation. So here's what I'm going to be talking about today. Teaching learning and learning teaching. We are all in the classroom. And I'm going to talk about the title a little bit to explain the mirror reversal of the terms. Many of you are probably familiar with the term teaching learning. Many universities have a center of teaching and learning. Sometimes it's also called a center for learning and teaching. But in any case, these offices tend to focus on the interaction between teachers and learners with the assumption that you need to learn about how your learners learn, and you need to modulate your teaching to accommodate multiple learning styles, for example. The idea is that beyond your subject matter expertise, you need to reflect on thinking about learning as such and teaching as such. And we need to engage in some robust and critical thinking about how teaching and learning meet. Now, recently, I've started reading a really popular TESOL textbook called Learning Teaching by Jim Scrivener. And the phrase here gets kind of turned around because it's not about thinking about the interaction between teachers and students. It's simply about the idea that all teachers need to learn how to teach, which is, I'm addressing the student group today, I believe. And so that's exactly what you're learning to do right now. But my talk is going to be trying to maybe get rid of a bad idea before it takes hold in you as you finish your program and become teachers. And that is the idea that you tick some boxes, you finish your teacher training, and then you know how to teach. And it's just sort of working out the kinks in your first semester or first year or first 2 years as a teacher. I'm going to argue differently, that just like every term, your students are going to be learning in the classroom, so will you be learning how to teach. You'll always be learning how to teach. So I want to combine the sense of reflecting as a personal teacher, a professional teacher, on how your learners learn, connect that to learning how to teach, and remember that we teachers are closest to our students when we are also learning. Their job, the student's job in the business of education, is to learn. And we might become a little bit alienated from them since we have a seemingly wholly different job to teach. But if we are learning teaching, teaching is the thing we are learning, then we too have a job of learning, and we are very similar to our students. We can stay similar to our students to that degree. In another way of speaking, that's to say there's a meta level to learning. That is, when students struggle, they might struggle with content, but often what they're struggling with is learning itself. It's not always the case that they need to learn English better, but often that they need to learn English better. The same would be true of teaching. It is not necessarily that we need to learn to be better teachers. It's that we need to learn to be better teachers. And so I'm going to condense all of that into a really handy phrase right now. I think good teaching is more about craft and habit than expertise. And so with that, I'll get on to my agenda for the rest of my presentation. Basically, I'm going to tell you 4 stories today. However, we're going to start by gathering our thoughts. I'm going to ask you to spend about 5 minutes just writing down some answers to these questions that I've brought with me. And so if you have robust thinking and if you have good responses to those questions, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for you to interrupt my planned remarks in case you're bored or in case you want to steer the conversation in some other direction. So I've got 4 stories ready for you, but we'll maybe end up going in a very different direction depending on what you attendees share with the group. So after we gather our thoughts, I'm going to talk about a concept called ventilation, which I take from my studies of writing and how to be a better writer. Then I'm going to talk about teaching techniques in the classroom, like what do you do when you're already in the class. Then I'm going to talk about lesson planning. And finally, I'm going to conclude with something about personal rapport. So on to gathering our thoughts. I've got 3 columns of questions here. That's a lot of questions for you. And if you're students and you haven't taught before, the answers to these questions might be a little bit hypothetical for you, but that's okay. I just want you to spend 5 minutes answering these questions to the best of your ability. What are the first things that come to your mind? And don't get too complicated. Don't try and come up with impressive, smart answers. In fact, I find that, stupid beginner answers are better for really talking about what teaching is. So for example, with the very first question, who are your students? I could answer that easily. My students are overwhelmingly non-native speakers. They're Korean. They have the same culture with all their other students. So I'm not teaching in a multicultural, multilingual classroom. I'm teaching basically in a monolingual classroom where the students are learning English as a totally foreign language. So I'm going to just time you using my phone. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock, and I hope you'll sketch some answers to these questions so we can have some focus going forward. So 5 minutes are on the clock. There are about 2 minutes left on my timer. If you find yourself not really having answers to these questions, or maybe you're totally uninterested in them, then go your own way. Spend the last 2 minutes to write about something that you hope I talk about today, or a question you want to ask in the context of my talk. About 30 seconds left, so just wrap up whatever thought you're working on right now. That's the end of the time. If you want to share anything right now, please type it into chat, like a question or a response or a comment, so I can see it and keep it in my mind as I talk. And I guess I'll make one more announcement. I signed in early because I wanted to watch what was on the schedule that I received on the PDF. So I feel like the schedule might have been adjusted a little bit. And so if I start to go overtime, or if I have extra time, interrupt me whenever you need to say, Chuck, wrap it up, or Chuck, talk longer. We have an hour to fill. Okay. Please,
Sure, Doc. No worries at all.
don't anybody hesitate to interrupt me at any point, because an hour of me talking will get super boring without interruptions. So the first topic I'm going to talk about is ventilation. And the title of the story here is "You Have No Pedagogy." And I'll tell you where that phrase comes from in just a second. But first, I'm going to share with you a graph of my teaching confidence. You heard rather thoroughly an account of my teaching experience from the past 10 years or so. But the first time I taught was in 2006. And the first class I taught, I was like, I know what I'm doing. I know how to do this. I am the best teacher ever. Nothing to learn, no notes. And I went through a little more graduate school after that, and that dropped my confidence a little bit. But then, with no training at all, I wanted to take sort of a working vacation. And so I signed up for a program at the time that was recruiting hundreds of people every year. I mean, for some perspective, at the time, South Korea was issuing the same amount of visas for English teachers as it was offering for US military personnel. So a huge amount of visas were being issued every year for English teachers. And in 2010, I was one of those, or 2009 rather. After a few weeks of teaching in a Korean high school, I'd had no training in TESOL at all. I was writing in my journal one night and I started with the phrase, like in all caps, "You have no pedagogy." And I wrote a little while about how I had no idea what I was doing. And I just thought, because I had taken high school French as a kid in America, I would know what to do in an English classroom in South Korea. And I didn't. And through the years, I've learned more and more about teaching, and my confidence has sort of gone up and down. But one practice has really helped me to grow more than any training course I've done or any book I've read. And it's something called ventilation. I take the word from Jolie Jensen in a book called Write No Matter What. And she describes what she calls a ventilation file that she keeps during each of her writing projects. She calls it a file that offers a confidential space for every hostile, resentful, negative thing that I think and feel when I try to write. I've made some changes in her expanded description, and I think you'll see why. The ventilation file gives me a way to safely engage my many, constantly mutating, mostly self-generated teaching obstacles. So I replaced the word writing with teaching. Once I've written about all the reasons I don't want to teach, I can set these reasons aside or address them through other means: therapy, talking with friends, advice from colleagues. By giving supportive space to whatever is standing in my way, the ventilation file lets me get on with my teaching or lesson planning. The ventilation file is a non-judgmental arena to express the doubts and fears that teaching so often generates. You don't have to reread what you've written, and you can erase or tear it up if you prefer. But if you do choose to reread, you will discover what you are telling yourself about your teaching, your abilities, and your situation. These teaching-related beliefs deserve your attention. The ventilation file allows you to incorporate your teaching resistance into your teaching process, and it gives you a way to identify and respond to teaching myths that may be standing in your way. This is all a sort of, I don't know, long-winded and academic way of saying, keep a journal when you teach. But I want to apply it specifically to this outcome, this phase 3.6 idea. Apply reflective practices to continuously improve teaching techniques in language education. My final word here is that everything practical, and that's the phase 5 stuff that I'm going to talk about, some phase 3 stuff too, but it's the two things in the middle of my talk. Everything practical can become alienating and stultifying unless you stay in touch with yourself and grow through ventilation. And just to share a personal story, actually, I had a real breakthrough just a month ago in the last term that I was teaching. I was sort of getting into the teaching doldrums and disappointed about some of my classes. And I started reading this book, Learning Teaching. And one of the first questions that the author asked in the book, he said, you need to seriously ask yourself, what do you want for your students? And I hope you won't judge me for revealing to you that I hadn't thought about that in a long time. Like what I actually want for them. That is, what kind of world I want them to live in, what I want them to be able to do when they leave my class, how I want them to prosper in their lives, right? That sort of stuff. And I followed that with my own question. Excuse me, there's an alarm I forgot I set. I followed that up with my own question, which is, what do I want from my students? And I realized that I had much more to say there. And I thought that was a problem, that instead of thinking about what I want for my students, in other words, what journey my classroom is part of for them, instead, I was way too focused on what I thought they should be bringing to my classroom as a destination, right? It's I discovered some deep reserve of selfishness, and I decided to try and deal with that. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to move on now to teaching techniques, and this is relevant to the phase 3 stuff. And here I'm going to tell you a story about the most successful class I ever taught. It was called English for Science and Technology, and I taught it at the Hanguk University of Foreign Studies. Now, I'll be upfront about this. Who was I teaching? Well, HUFS, as it's called, HUFS, is kind of like the Oxford of foreign languages in Korea. So anyone who wants to be a translator or an interpreter tries to get into this school. So I had some very motivated learners, and that helped this class to be successful. But I think it was also successful because it is my best effort ever at what is defined in phase 3.3. I created an engaging and interactive learning environment that fostered students' language development. And my cheat was this. I gave the responsibility to the students to do as much of the creating as possible. So it wasn't really me creating the engaging environment. I prepared the platform, but the creativity beyond that was mostly supplied by the students. You can see a little bit from my syllabus here and from the assignment handout to see what I mean. Many teachers, when they taught this class, they would just take like a college or a high school biology book in English, or, like an earth sciences textbook. And every week they'd go through a chapter of the textbook, and students would study it kind of as like just a really complicated dictionary of the target language. I thought this was boring. Also, I'm not that good at science, so I figured I might get confused by some of the stuff in that textbook. So instead, what I decided to do was this right here. Whoops, I'm sorry. I had students in an early session, I think it was week 2, maybe it was week 3, they chose one of 3 tracks for self-study and presentations. The first is movie and TV reviews. The second was presentations on blogs, websites, and other social media and cultural clearinghouses, if you will. And here, another asterisk. I taught this course in 2012. So smartphone usership was about 50% at that time. It was not at the rate it is today, where everybody has a smartphone. So that's important to know. Track 3 was for people who were tech gurus or had a very technologically minded habit, and they would give reports on new technology for consumers, like new phones, new computers, and so on. I had lists of potential topics for the students, but I also welcomed them to find their own movies or find their own websites, find their own technology. The assignment handout you'll see in the right column here, which defines, what they have to do for their presentations. And the rest of the semester simply went like this. The students signed up for 3 presentations, and every period, the periods were 3 hours long, 7 students would do presentations. And that left me free to circulate around the classroom. I could sit near students and talk with them during a presentation. I could participate in their group work or their small group discussions after the presentations. And so a real bonus here for me was that I didn't have to prepare for class. However, it was also dangerous because I couldn't prepare for class. So as much as my students were able to be creative in this context, I had to be spontaneous and creative as well. Some weeks I would not have to do very much because the students would come in with 2 or 3 discussion questions that were really excellent. And so I'd put the students in small groups, they'd discuss, I'd circulate around the classroom and offer some tips on phrasing or some useful vocabulary words here and there. Then we'd come together as a class. Other times, though, the discussion would end too quickly, or the discussion questions wouldn't be very good, or the students would be so confused by the presenter that conversation would fall flat. And in that case, it was up to me to develop spontaneous tutorials or vocabulary lessons, or maybe address a grammar point. But as a result, on the whole, every week, students came in the classroom excited to see what would happen this week, and they left the classroom with a clear sense of having learned something both about technology and about the English language. So the lesson here for the matter of teaching in the classroom, teaching technique, is, for me anyway, there are other approaches, but I want the classroom to be as, I want the students to have as much control of the classroom as possible so that I can stay in the background as more or less a facilitator rather than a lecturer like I am right now. Word astronaut. And this is relevant to all of these outcomes here. And gosh, that is so much serious big business language right here. Comprehensive lesson plans, varied and structural formats, clear and measurable learning objectives, organized and visually appealing lesson plans, and so on. Well, I'm going to ask you an honest question. It's not really a question, it's a rhetorical question. I often feel like, what are lesson plans even for? You know, I Googled lesson plan, and you'll see that in the top left of this slide. They're high, you can write a highly organized and detailed lesson plan like this. I do that when I want to share a lesson with a colleague, or if I'm going to present it to a teacher training meeting of some course. But in the lower left here, you will see what I actually take into class with me. It's just some notes about points that I don't want to forget to hit. And the rest of the class is structured by whatever PowerPoint I have, or a textbook, or some other structure that's set ahead of time. Why is that? Well, one of the experiences that sapped my teaching confidence early on, when I started teaching as a graduate student, under the watchful eye of one of my professors, I would have these meticulously planned lessons that would just be far too detailed. And I would lose my place in the lesson plan, and I would get nervous that I wasn't covering things fast enough. So I would rush through a lesson, I would cut off discussions, I would end activities early to make sure I got through all the material. That could be disastrous. So I've developed the practice of trying to plan my lessons as a structure that the students are going to engage with too, like a PowerPoint. Another trick about lesson planning is I try to never start with nothing, right? So this is why I'm using the example of a very bored astronaut. It began my job, my task. I was assigned with a group of other teachers that I was working with last year at the University of Suwon. It's another college in Korea. We had to write a collection of free talking exercises to last about an hour per exercise. And that was it. That was all the instruction we were given. There was a panel, a committee of 10 of us, and we had to each write one lesson. And I hate starting with nothing. So I looked through our lesson archives. We had a big shared folder of lessons at University of Suwon. And I found an essay about boredom during COVID quarantines. And I thought this could turn into a really cool free talking exercise where students would plan quarantine activities so that they wouldn't be bored if they ever had to quarantine. And I presented that lesson to my colleagues. And the most common piece of feedback that I got from them was, this is kind of a bummer. We are tired of COVID. I presented this last winter, right? So rather about last February. So about this time last year, they said, we're tired of COVID. We're tired of thinking about it. Quarantines are kind of a bummer to the students for sure. Does it have to have that context? And here I had this great lesson I'd made, and they weren't taking exception to the language points I was using or the nature of the activity. They just wanted a different context. So I thought about other contexts where boredom would come into the picture. And that's how I ended up with this lesson. I hope my link works here. Let me know if you came with me. Are you still seeing the PowerPoint slide, or are you seeing a Google Slides presentation now?
Yes, Doc.
It stopped?
It's still the
No, it
PowerPoint.
doesn't. Yes, very clear.
It's still the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm going to have to change my share. Let's see here. There you go. Now you should see a Google Slides screen. Is that?
Yes.
Did I
Yes,
manage that?
correct.
All right. So this is a really short PowerPoint. It's only 6 slides, right? But it's supposed to be a free talking lesson. So I structured it to, first of all, give students a view of how to use the vocabulary, right? So boredom is translated here into Korean. This is the abstract noun. I made sure to use that in a sentence, but I also used it as an adjective in both of its adjectival forms, because Korean students often struggle with the difference between bored and boring, or scared and scary, or those two-way adjectives, right? And then I used it as a noun as well, just to make sure they'd be able to use that target vocabulary. But that's really just a sort of icebreaker to ease them into the idea that, okay, we're in English class and we're going to use English now. Here I give them a bit of context about space travel, how long it takes to get from the Earth to the moon, how long it would take to get to Mars. For some fun cultural knowledge, I introduced them to Scott Kelly, who holds some records for most amount of time spent in space. He's also famous because he's part of a twin study, an ongoing twin study as to the effect of space travel on the human body. But this is all to drive home the point that there's potentially a lot of boredom in outer space. And so I gave the students the mission of designing fun activities for astronauts. So in groups, they had to plan a series of activities to entertain astronauts. And then I always like to have a backup in case they finish too quickly. The challenge was to think of 3 long-term activities or projects an astronaut could do for fun if they were flying alone to Mars over a course of 8 months. A main concern of ours in Korea is the variable English level of classes. You never quite know. Some students are at a very beginner level, and other students magically have a preponderance of people who went to high school in Canada. It's a mixed bag. So I always include additional free talking questions at the end of any lesson plan in case we need to get there. And that's it for this lesson. I do have a lesson plan that explains this PowerPoint to someone who's never seen it before. So I have a document that looks like this in the upper left. We should be back on the PowerPoint now. Can I get an amen to that? Are we back on the PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. So it does exist. I have a lesson plan for this very bored astronaut lesson, so I could share it with a colleague. But if I go into the class to teach this PowerPoint, I'm taking just this one sheet of notes with me if I need it. Otherwise, I'm going to let this PowerPoint be my guide. Now, of course, your results may vary, and you might be required by a dean or a department head or some other authority to submit lesson plans ahead of time. You might be required to have to make so much progress per week through a set curriculum. And in that case, lesson planning can be essential. But in following with my theme, which is that you want to learn how to teach in your classroom and keep your classroom as open as possible for both the students and yourself to exercise your creativity. That's it. The less structure you bring with you into the classroom, the more general the structure, the more room there is to play around. Now, if you were watching carefully, you'll notice that 5.5 and 5.6 were absent from the long list of outcomes that were relevant to this talk about this portion of the talk about lesson planning. Why did I leave those out? If you want to know what they are, 5.5 is customize lesson plans to accommodate diverse learning styles and student needs. 5.6 is incorporate assessment strategies to gauge student understanding and inform instructional adjustments. Why did I leave that out of the lesson planning portion? Any thoughts?
You already got. Can I speak, sir? You already customize. Yeah, you already customize your own lesson plan based on the students' level of their motivation. I mean, how you motivate them.
So you're thinking about, they're built in 5.5 and 5.6. It's already built into the customization. It's going to allow students to manifest their own diversity. And it'll allow me to assess them in kind, right?
Yes.
It's true. But I have another reason for leaving them out. And it has to do with personal rapport. The thing about these 2 points, the point about accommodating diverse learning styles and assessment strategies. Here's the deal. The literature on learning styles is immense. I mean, this is, people do PhDs on educational psychology, and that's just a huge field of literature to master, a huge field of scholarship. Likewise with assessment, there's, if you've never taken an assessment class, I took one, a TESOL assessment class when I was a PhD student, and I was amazed at all the stuff I had never thought about before when I was writing a test. Like, I thought it was simple. You write a test question because you want the students to answer the question to show you what they learned. But wrong. You have to think about authentic versus inauthentic measures. You have to think about so many different factors. It's a whole course on its own. There's so much to think about there. I want to close talking about rapport because I think rapport is a shortcut to these massive topics, which you should still study. But the fast way to get some feedback from students and to make room for your students is to think about rapport. Now, I want to distinguish this in 2 ways: group rapport and personal rapport. In terms of the talk right now, you could comment on my group rapport in the sense that I am manifesting a persona in front of a group, and I'm trying my best to make sure that I seem open and accommodating and friendly to you as a group. However, and this is actually very difficult in Zoom, I have almost no personal rapport with any of you right now, except for the very brief interactions I've had now with 2 or 3 people who've spoken to me during the course of this Zoom. Personal rapport can be really hard work, at least for me. I'm very comfortable being in front of a group. I don't get very nervous. I can just sort of extemporize unendingly, but one-on-one, I get nervous in a different way. It's kind of surprising. You might be surprised. So, again, to drive this point home, thinking about accessibility, evaluation, and assessment, it deserves hours of devoted study. But building good rapport, both in front of your group and one-on-one with each of your students, is going to create an open and direct channel for students to communicate these things to you, whether like they communicate it explicitly, right? Or you know them well enough that they communicate it implicitly by like their body language, right? And here I'm going to tell you a story about 2 of my students, and this will give you some insight into my own personal psychology as a teacher. I'm going to call them Susan and Brian. These are both Korean students that I've had recently. Susan was eager from day one, and she liked me, or at least wanted to like me, came right in. And in Korea, the whole thing is you show teachers you like them by giving them little gifts. That never happened to me in the US, but in Korea, it happens to me frequently enough that I know that I've done a really good job in this student's mind, that if they bring me a cookie or something like that, or a little packet of coffee or something like that. Susan had a little brownie, packaged brownie for me on the first day. So she wanted to get off on the right foot. She always tried hard in every class. And as a result, it was kind of a temptation for my laziness, because it was very comfortable to have this student who was really friendly towards me, especially because the class as a whole that she was in was a rather sluggish class. And so instead of trying to figure out why this group of boys at the back of the classroom was sleeping or not participating in the activities, instead of trying to interact with them, I could always just pivot to Susan and get a smile and a ready response. I'm a little bit ashamed that I didn't try harder in that class to get to know the other students. I mean, I got to know some of the other students, but not as many as I could have, because I more or less use Susan as a crutch. Am I doing a good job? I could look over at Susan, see her eagerly, like, I have an answer, I like your class, and I would say, okay, my job is done here. But now let's talk about Brian. He was a student that I had in the last term, and he's going to go down in my journal anyway as a success story, because from the beginning of the class, Brian tried to sort of disappear into the back of the classroom. You'll all have students like this. He was shy. He was scared. I mean, even to utter English to me one-on-one when no one else was in the classroom. He was for sure content to remain invisible, even if it meant failing the course. The temptation for my laziness here was, okay, here's a student who I can ignore. He is not going to try in my class, so I can leave him to his own devices. That was especially tempting because the class as a whole was one of my more active classes. But I didn't want to give up on him, because I thought about Susan and how it was so easy to let a student be themselves when they were an eager, outgoing, participating student. And I thought, well, who is Brian? Let me find out at least who he really is. So after class, before class, when we went on breaks, and even a few times walking around campus, when I got a chance, I would just ask Brian a really simple question. Like, I mean, really simple, because he was so shy. So it would be a really simple question like, is it cold in here? When I came into the classroom. And he would say either, cold, no. I would ask him, do you like my hat? I would ask him, did you have lunch today? Sometimes even I would talk to him in Korean, although my Korean's not that great, and so I can't go very deep into conversation there. Anyway, as the course, as the semester unfolded, he didn't get a lot. He didn't change a whole lot. He didn't like miraculously transform into this outgoing A+ student. But from somebody who would just shut down in weeks 1, 2, and 3, when we had a group activity, he would just shut down and just not participate. But by the end of the semester, when we had our final speaking test, and it was a group speaking test, he got stuck with a student he'd never talked to before. And he successfully got through the speaking test without stumbling or stuttering or giving up and clamming up. And I attribute that to my efforts to get to know him. It takes a lot of energy. And if you have a classroom with 30 students in it, you're going to feel like you don't have energy to do that with every student. And you don't, probably. But the truth is, there's going to be a lot of Susans. They're going to be eager to get to know you. The point with rapport is to figure out the Bryans who are clearly shy or somehow scared of the foreign language classroom. This is a different story than the people who think they're too cool for the language classroom. There's also the people who are sleeping. Some of them are lazy, but some of them, I don't know, they're working a part-time job, maybe even a full-time job. But the point is getting to know those students. You get to know, why are they participating in my class in the way that they are? And is there a way that I could make some kind of adjustment to the classroom that would accommodate them better? And so, like I said, that makes a shortcut to these big questions of accessibility and assessment and so on. So I want to circle back now to my title, which is We Are All in the Classroom. And I want to conclude by looking at some circles. So here is on the left a rather complex circle called the teaching and the experiential learning cycle from Scrivener's book Learning Teaching. The inner circle is what students do, right? So they do something, they recall having done it before, they reflect on it, they conclude on their reflections, and then they prepare to do something again, right? So it's a circle. And the outer circle is sort of what you should do as a teacher to guide them. And it's very complex, and I think helpfully so. If you have a lot of time to have a very fine-grained, reflective response to your teaching. But if you don't, for you students, if you're new in the classroom and you're just, it's all you can do to just sort of hold together and not run out of the classroom screaming or sobbing or hit the alarm and sleep in, or, you know, take an emergency mental health day. If you feel overwhelmed as a teacher, I think you can think about this circle on the right, which simplifies things a little bit. Make sure to vent. Don't be afraid of positive or negative feelings you have about your classroom. Write it down for yourself. Make it part of your planning process. Try and keep your planning process as simple as your teaching context will allow, so that the teaching you do in the classroom can be as active as it possibly can. Being an active learner in your classroom, learning how to teach actively day by day, is going to enhance your rapport with your students, and it's going to change what you have to vent about. You'll find yourself venting more and more about bigger and bigger challenges as you get more and more confident in the classroom. And that's how you grow as a teacher. That's a growth mindset, if you ask me. So that's the end of my talk. And on my final slide here, I have a short bibliography for you. These are some books that have influenced my thinking as a teacher. Most of them are about TESOL. One of them, though, is a much more philosophical book, but I highly recommend all of them. And here's my email address, should any of you want to contact me at any time. I guess I should have left that up there for a little bit longer. But it's Dr. Chuck Robinson at gmail.com. dr.chuck.robinson at gmail.com. I'll write that in chat too. So, I mean, there's time for Q&A, I think. I don't know. I've lost track of this schedule.
Yes, Doc. But before that, let me thank you, Dr. Robinson, for giving clear and measurable learning objectives aligned with curriculum standards to facilitate a more focused and effective teaching. Thank you so much once again. Now, let me ask the participants, do you have any questions or clarifications to our speaker? Please feel free to speak out. You can just unmute your microphone. Any questions? No questions? So that means everything is clear. So I will now proceed to the awarding of the certificate to our first resource speaker. Oh,
Somebody just put a
clarification. Yes, yeah. Okay, so let me read that. Oh, so this is from Pastor Udale. Thank you, Dr. Robinson, for the thorough presentations of real practical principles and experiences in language skills instruction, employing diverse teaching techniques tailored to individual needs and learning styles is essential for effective learning. Engaging and interactive learning environments play a crucial role in fostering language development and optimizing skill acquisition. Customizing of lesson plans to accommodate diverse student needs along the incorporating assessment strategies ensures tailored instruction while utilizing provided format samples and applying reflective practices support continuous improvement in teaching techniques. Right, so that's really long. And the second one, so to clarify, Dr. Chak, 5.5 and 5.6 are something we utilize for use based on the types of students we are teaching. We adjust or morph the way we teach based on the learner's background, behavior, age, or cognitive level. Yes, Doc.
That's right. And just to give a really short commercial for learning about assessment, and that's in 5.6. Assessment can be really tricky. The simplest example is this: a multiple choice test. You might think that it assesses a student's vocabulary, but there are students who are just good test takers. And so your multiple choice test, if the questions aren't carefully constructed, might just be testing the students' general critical thinking skills, right? If any of you are learning a language with Duolingo, this is actually one of the principles that Duolingo actually exploits in their app, which is that you know 70% of the words in the sentence, and you just guess what the other 30% of the sentence probably means. Well, if you're trying to assess a student's vocabulary knowledge, you don't want them guessing, because then it will look like they know words that they don't know, right? So assessment is a complicated thing, but what this commenter has said about adjusting or morphing the way you teach based on background, behavior, age, cognitive level, absolutely. And this is what made me despair when I went into the high school classroom. If you all are going to be, any of you are going to be teaching high school students, my heart goes out to you. Those kids have way more energy than you do, and they always will. And it will be a fight to the death to keep them entertained and to keep that balance of disciplinary control of your classroom, but also being the cool teacher. That's really tough, and it's a learning experience. And here's the truth. I'll say one more thing in response to this comment. You need to anticipate that a good chunk of time, like a semester or a year in a new teaching environment, is just going to be keeping your head above water and like figuring out who are the students here and what are they like. And this goes double if you make some kind of move internationally, right? If you are now teaching abroad, right, in China or in Vietnam or Kazakhstan or something like that, you have a new culture to learn on top of like questions about age level or cognitive ability or so on.
All right. So I hope that is clear, very clear to our participant. Any more questions? Okay. So if there is none, let me read the citation of our certificate.
Stephen,
Yes.
it looks like
Another
Stephen
question.
Domingo has raised a hand.
Hello. Um,
Hi.
Yes, sir. Mhm.
yeah, this is just a too personal question. Um, I'm just curious since sir you are you've mentioned you are as as far as we know, you are teaching Korean students, right? On our end, some of us joining here today are from Thailand. So we are kind of um having this how do you call this, like the language barrier, since English is their um foreign language, not their second language, unlike with us, Filipinos, that is our second language. So this is like too personal for you when you're teaching Korean students. What seems to be the problem, or like um you're having problem when it comes to teaching to them?
You know, the language barrier, obviously. My Korean now is all right. But I'm married to a Korean, and so I've been studying the language on and off since we got married 13 years ago. So language barrier was difficult, but I had the good luck of my first year. I was the English teacher in the English zone, and there was always a Korean co-teacher there to conduct discipline and as a native speaker, right? But a big cultural problem I had is eye contact. So direct eye contact in the US, at least, my assumption is direct eye contact shows strength of character and that a student is paying attention, right? But one-on-one, students are much more likely to avoid the eye contact of their superiors, like teachers, because direct eye contact is seen as aggressive. And so I would often get mad at students because I would be trying to talk to them and they wouldn't look at me. And I'd be like, why aren't you looking at me? But other than that, I think a good thing about a cultural barrier most of the time and a language barrier is that if you play it off the right way, it has the effect of lowering what is called the affective filter. If we can all laugh at the fact that, oh, this professor is American and he doesn't know what he's doing in Korea, and oh, these students, their English is so limited and we can barely talk to each other. That's hilarious. If we're all laughing about it, then the tension in the classroom dissipates and some real fun learning can happen. But if everything is uptight and you're nervous because you're in a country you don't understand, and you're nervous because you can't communicate these fine-grained explanations of grammar points to your students, the classroom is going to get very clenched up and awkward. And you might even find, if it's an elective class, that your attendance numbers drop really sharply, really quickly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Sure. Thanks for asking a question.
All right. So I think this is the right time for me to award the certificate. So let me share my screen again. Okay, sorry. Can everyone see my slide?
Wow, that's beautiful.
All right. Certificate of recognition. This certificate is presented to Professor Charles Lay Robinson as a resource speaker with a topic teaching, learning, and learning teacher. We are all in the classroom. We hereby acknowledge the exceptional proficiency and dedication you demonstrated in the field of teaching English to speakers of other languages. Your exemplary skills in communication, linguistics expertise, and unwavering commitment to promoting language education have significantly contributed to the advancement of English language learning worldwide. Your impactful contributions as a TESOL speaker have inspired and empowered educators and learners alike, fostering cultural exchange, linguistic diversity, and cross-cultural understanding. Through your engaging presentations, workshops, and seminars, you have effectively shared valuable insights, innovative strategies, and best practices, enriching the professional development of educators and enhancing the language acquisition journey of learners across diverse contexts. In recognition of your outstanding achievements and invaluable contributions to the TESOL community, we proudly present this certificate as a token of our appreciation and admiration. Accorded this 17th day of February 2024, signed Carmela M. Salenga, President, Streps Prism International, and Dr. Roxanne Rubic Camarosa, Executive Consultant, Strap Prism International. Thank you so much again, Professor Robinson, and we look forward to having you as one of our speakers at our future events. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, so next stop, we have